This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Four killed in attacks against Ebola response centers in the DRC. The Intergovernmental Authority on Development meets in Addis to elect a new chair. And East Libyan warplanes attack Chadian forces near the southwest oil fields. Hello and a very warm welcome to Africa Live on CGTN. I'm Lindy Mtongana in Nairobi. And with me in studio is Raman Young with a preview of your business news.
That's right, Lindy. Here's what's coming up in the course of the hour. Ghana equities hit a record low over falling investor confidence. And Jumia has shut down operations in yet another African country, this time in Tanzania. We'll have the details on those stories and lots more coming your way in the course of the hour. For now, though, let's start with the latest in current affairs with Lindy.
Thanks, Rama. Well, we start the program in the DRC, where 3 healthcare workers have been killed and several others injured in attacks by militia against 2 Ebola response centers in eastern Congo early on Thursday. Mai Mai fighters simultaneously attacked the Ebola centers in North Kivu and Ituri areas. The head of the DRC Ebola response, Jean-Jacques Muyembe, says the violence is a blow that has severely hampered efforts to contain the Ebola epidemic, which aid groups report is on the decline. The attacks were linked to suspicion that Ebola does not exist, and in some cases, resentment that the militia have not benefited from the influx of donor funding. This is not the first time workers trying to contain the second worst Ebola outbreak, which has killed 2,000 people, have been targeted. Well, let's bring you the very latest on this story. We go live now to Kinshasa. CGTN's Chris Ochambringa is standing by. Chris, another group of healthcare workers killed in the eastern Congo. How is this going to affect the region's response to Ebola?
Lindy, it's going to have a very devastating effect on the response to the Ebola outbreak because, first of all, it demoralizes the healthcare workers who have been risking their lives, to try and contain this outbreak. And secondly, healthcare workers
We do apologize for that. We seem to have lost Chris Ochambringa, but here's more now from him. Of course, as we know, hundreds of civilians in the Democratic Republic of Congo's eastern city of Beni have been calling for the withdrawal of UN peacekeepers from their area. The locals accuse UN troops of failing to protect them from rebels following an increase in killings of civilians. But a Congolese analyst says the troops should remain because the DRC won't be able to fill the void that will be left. Violent protests in Beni have left at least 6 people dead. The UN says it is investigating reports of a killing by one of its peacekeepers. Here's more from Chris Ochambringa.
Residents of Beni staged protests over recent killings of civilians by rebels. Attacks against civilians intensified in the eastern town after the Congolese army launched an offensive against the rebels last month. Civil society organizations have recorded more than 80 deaths since October. Authorities blame the killings on the Allied Democratic Forces rebel group, an Islamist militia from Uganda. These people now want the UN peacekeeping mission to leave their area.
We want to see how to remove MONUSCO from our area because they seem to have forgotten that their mandate in Congo is to protect us.
But the UN peacekeeping mission says the ADF is to blame.
Without trying to find excuses, we just want to point out that the ADF has a very vicious modus operandi. When they are targeted, when they are attacked, when they are under attack and under pressure, they go at night, kill random civilians with machetes in the middle of nowhere. Sometimes people were killed, it's true, close to our bases. But anybody who has gone to Beni knows that close to our bases, even if it's 500 meters, it is still a jungle area.
This political analyst in Kinshasa believes the UN peacekeepers should stay longer until the Congolese army is built into a formidable force.
If the community says MONUSCO should leave, who will they remain with? The Congolese army and ADF rebels? Those rebels are even known to carry out attacks in army uniforms. Let's face it, our army is still weak. It can't wipe out militia groups on its own.
Beni has seen militia attacks for many years. The town is also the epicenter of the Ebola outbreak that has killed close to 2,200 people since last August. The DRC government has announced that it will carry out joint operations with UN peacekeepers to wipe out all armed groups in Beni and other parts of the country. But the protesters in Beni are sticking to their guns about their demand for the withdrawal of the blue helmets. They're calling on other Congolese to hold countrywide protests to compel the UN to pull out of their area. Chris Ochamringa, CGTN, Kinshasa, Democratic Republic of Congo.
Well, staying in the DRC, let's return now to our coverage of a recent attack on a Ebola response center that's left at least 3 health workers dead. Let's return now to CGTN's Chris Ochamringa for the latest on the story. Chris, you were telling us just a moment ago what impact the death of these healthcare workers might have on the Ebola response in the eastern DRC.
Yes, Lindy, I was saying, first of all, it would demoralize the healthcare workers who have been risking their lives, to try and contain this outbreak. And secondly, it also risks, it poses a big risk of the spread of the disease. The World Health Organization chief has just tweeted that, they are all heartbroken about this attacks on healthcare workers because, they have made significant gains, in trying to contain this outbreak. There have been very few cases recorded over the past couple of weeks, and they were saying that if it continues like this, then they will really win the fight against Ebola. But now that people are fleeing to different parts of the country, it becomes very difficult to track the disease, the transmission of the disease. Healthcare workers in North Kivu have been working under very difficult circumstances. They are applying a strategy known as contact tracing. Basically means following up all cases, all people who have come into contact, with the Ebola patients. For instance, if we have 60 people in one bus and one person has Ebola, then healthcare workers are supposed to try and find all these other people who, have already dispersed to other places. So it's going to be a very difficult moment for healthcare workers and generally the Congolese government to try and contain this outbreak if these kinds of attacks continue. Lindy?
And Chris, according to reports, Mai fighters were behind this attack. What is their motive, though, in these violent attacks on Ebola response centers?
Well, the Mai militia is a community-based militia group, that is supposed to protect people from its community, from other armed groups. And they have been carrying out a lot of atrocities in North Kivu and generally Eastern DRC for many decades. Now, it's not very clear, Lindy. There's a saying that in war, the first...
We do apologize for that. We seem to be having some technical challenges in connecting with Chris Ochamringa there, bringing us, of course, that update on that attack on an Ebola center in the DRC. Now let's turn our attention to security matters. French President Emmanuel Macron has ordered the military to assess its operations against militants in the Sahel region. This follows the recent deaths of 13 French soldiers during an operation against jihadists in Mali. These soldiers died after 2 helicopters collided in Malian airspace. It was the heaviest loss for the French military in over 4 decades. In his first remarks since the incident occurred, President Macron seems to leave all options open.
La mission qui est la nôtre là-bas est importante.
Our mission there is an important one. That being said, the current circumstances we are going through in the Sahel lead me to consider all our strategic options. I held the first meeting yesterday, and over the coming weeks we will dedicate ourselves to some deep-rooted work with the government, together with our army, to look at the modalities of our intervention. And let me tell you, all options are on the table.
The first IGAD Ordinary Summit is taking place in the Ethiopian capital, Addis Ababa. This is the first such meeting in almost 10 years. Representatives of member states are set to elect the next chair who will take over from Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed. However, a diplomatic feud between Kenya and Djibouti could play out and determine the outcome of the vote. Djibouti, together with Somalia, are opposed to Kenya's bid for the chairmanship. This means that a new country could take the post. Well, CGTN's Guru Mchala is following this story closely for us. He now joins us live from Addis Ababa. Guru, of course, this interministerial meeting started today in Addis. What is on the agenda?
Well, Lindy, good evening from Addis Ababa, where the IGAD Heads of State Summit in few hours will take place on Friday morning. As you know, IGAD Heads of State Summit deals with most of the time peace and security issues, and this time around it is not that different. One of the most important issues here is going to be the situation in South Sudan. One, the peace process itself, which is not really a story of success at the moment, as you know. And also, this meeting is expected to decide also the fate of a former Vice President Riek Machar himself. Other important items with regards to the peace and security situation is the situation in the Gulf of Aden, the situation in Somalia are all agenda items for the heads of state to talk about. And the other most important issue, something different out of peace and security, and as you said earlier, is this meeting is a regular, ordinary meeting, which happened after so many years. The last time the IGAD heads of state came together for an ordinary summit like this is 2008. And this time around, they will sign an agreement called a Treaty for Reformation of IGAD, the regional community itself. So many agenda items on the table, but these are the most important ones, Lindy.
And indeed, the endorsement of the Executive Secretary will also take place tomorrow at the level of the presidents. Tell us more about that.
Well, apart from the chairmanship replacement that we've talked about, which is taking turn by turn amongst the member states themselves, which Ethiopia is holding at the moment, the other most important development that we expect tomorrow when the summit begins is the endorsement of former Ethiopian Foreign Minister Workana Gabayo to the job of Executive Secretary of IGAD Secretariat itself. As you know, it used to be the Kenyan Mahabub Maalim who was serving IGAD Secretariat for the last perhaps 2 terms under the capacity of Executive Secretary. Now he has left. The new Executive Secretary is expected to take over tomorrow, and this is an important job. As you know, IGAD Secretariat has a duty of implementing the decisions made by these heads of state all the time, and this is not a simple job. It's a tough job, and Workana Gabayo is expected to take over and perhaps deliver as his predecessor.
And of course, you mentioned just how significant a role peace and security occupies in the deliberations of these IGAD leaders. When it comes to issues of security on the continent, how important is IGAD as a regional bloc?
Well, IGAD, the Intergovernmental Authority on Development, is an organization that has been there since the 1980s. It has been working in several fields, apart from peace and security, on developmental issues, environment, and others. But this time around, because of the peace and security problems in this region particularly, IGAD has been busy trying to handle the situation in South Sudan, in Somalia, sometimes in Ethiopia, sometimes in border clashes in Kenya or other places. IGAD is very vital in this regard of trying to, calm situations down between countries or conflict within a certain country. It has been playing a key role, for instance, in the situation between Sudan and South Sudan. Since the 2009, the Comprehensive Peace Agreement, IGAD has been involving there. And then the formation of South Sudan is also solely the responsibility of IGAD, of course, with the help of the African Union and the United Nations. So apart from this particular activities, IGAD has been also serving this region, the Eastern Africa region, in preventing conflict. It has been, educating several groups or bringing them together for a peace process, instead of addressing issues after they are out of hand. So IGAD has been important, and the African Union time and again said IGAD takes the lead when it comes to addressing conflict issues in the Eastern African region, and the AU follows. And this complementarity has been sort of a story of success, Lindy.
Thank you so much. Girum Chala joining us there live from Addis Ababa. Now, vote counting is underway in Namibia following tightly contested elections. CGTN's Angela Coppola now reports on how Namibians are anxiously waiting as those results trickle in.
The ECN has been monitoring and managing the voting process very carefully in the build-up and on voting day. It started with the country's president being the first voter and finished with the last voter casting their ballots well after midnight.
His Excellency was the first voter, but it's just to show how effective the process is. And we are very happy and believe that the rest of the process will be smooth and credible.
Opposition parties were keeping a close eye on the results coming in, monitoring what the ECN was doing.
If there is a delay in the announcement, then I would have doubt about the outcome. But if there are no delays, and if the announcement is made either on Thursday or Friday, I'll be comfortable to accept the outcome.
Other leaders are a little more diplomatic in their response, choosing to wait until there's an official pronouncement.
I think that is a bridge that we will cross when we are there, because one still needs to follow the process very closely before you can respond on that one.
Observer mission members from several groups have been in the country for several days, observing the build-up and the voting day. They've had their work cut out for them, and it's unlikely they could get to all 4,200 odd polling stations that they had to get to.
Well, we have people on the ground that all over the regions, and we're also collaborating with other observer missions like the SADC and the Commonwealth, and all put together, I think we have a wide spread of coverage.
The laborious task of checking and double-checking those figures coming in from the different provinces and regions is underway. Everyone wants to make sure that those numbers are perfectly spot on, so there's no dispute. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Windhoek, Namibia.
Time now for a short break. Here's what's still ahead on the program. East Libyan warplanes attack Chadian forces near the southwest oil fields. And South Africa's drought-hit farmers concerned over the poor harvest.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there. To see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.
East Libya-based forces say their warplanes attacked targets near oil fields in the southwest of the country on Thursday after fighting in the area briefly shut one of the oil fields. The LNA said it had driven rival factions from the 70,000 barrel per day oil field after carrying out airstrikes, leading to a halt in production. Engineers, however, said on Thursday that production was gradually restarting. A Libyan National Army official said the Mi-35 attack helicopters had struck at Chadian forces who were preparing to attack the Sharara oil field, which is Libya's biggest field. Libya's oil production has been repeatedly disrupted over the past 5 years by conflict and blockades. Well, CGTN's Adel Al-Maghrawi is in Cairo and joins us now live for more on the story. Adel, what more can you tell us about the warplanes that attacked near those oil fields in the southwest of Libya?
What we know so far is that on Wednesday, the government of National IGAD, its military forces, say they have gained control of El Fil oil field, which is one of the main oil fields, one of the biggest as well in Libya, in the southwestern part of Libya. And they said they have liberated it, quote unquote, from mercenaries who were protecting it. Now, it's not the first time we hear the GNA accuse General Khalifa Haftar's forces, the LNA, of using mercenaries, but they never indicate or point to the other as military or take over from the other government. For example, the rival governments have been fighting for so long over control over these oil fields. This morning, on Thursday, as you've said, the spokesman, Ahmed al-Mismari, said that they have launched several airstrikes in nearby areas. But according to the head of the National Oil Corporation, the Libyan oil company, the main one, which is under the management of the government of National IGAD in the west, they said that the field is now operating. There has been no casualties or injuries in the staff working them. The oil field, is quite important and is one of the fields operated by Italian petroleum giant Eni.
Well, Adel, just give us a bit of a lay of the land. I mean, who controls these oil fields or the facilities and even the oil revenues in Libya, and just how important are they?
So, important-wise, these are vital areas for the entire country. Libya, in terms of economy, depends largely on its oil production, and it's quite rich in oil production. The oil fields spread across the country. There's the oil crescent, what is called like fields in Libya's territory. Together they form sort of a crescent in shape, and these are the mass production for Libya. They are mainly controlled or protected by General Khalifa Haftar's LNA forces, the eastern government that is rival and is now in a war against Tripoli to take over and seize power from the government of National IGAD, backed by the United Nations. These oil fields in general, to sell oil, are not allowed to sell any oil except through the National Oil Corporation, which is the main national Libyan company responsible for all oil and gas deals in Libyan territories. Now, because the government of National IGAD is recognized by the United Nations and therefore have more legitimacy politically, quote unquote, the NOC belongs to or is under the management of the government of National IGAD, and the revenues gets distributed all over the country. But still, the presence of security has been quite a battle. Both rival militaries, the GNAs and the LNAs, East and West, have been fighting over and trying to push the other security forces away. And both would refer to the other as mercenaries and accuse them of hiring Chadian or other African nations as fighters and mercenaries to fight this war instead of them physically. So this is the war, and the oil field stretches from the eastern side with the borders with Egypt to the southwestern side, south of Tripoli. And the crucial part is that El Fil oil part is very close to Al Sharara, the biggest. You said 70,000 oil barrels a day for El Fil. Al Sharara, which is about just 2 hours away, produces about 300,000. That's almost 1/5 or 1/4 of Libya's 1.3 million barrels of oil produced daily.
So clearly a lot at stake here. Thank you so much, Adel Al-Maghrawi, joining us there live from Cairo. Now, turning to South Sudan, where more people who have been living in displaced camps are returning to their homes. They say improved security across the region has given them an opportunity to make a fresh start. This follows the signing of a peace deal last year between President Salva Kiir and his rival, Riek Machar.
Deborah Chandeng is finally home after 6 years living in IDP camps. Her joy captures the anxiety of returning home and reuniting with her family. Deborah and thousands other South Sudanese fled their homes after war erupted in the country.
I am filled with happiness. I'm very happy to be at home with my children. God should bring peace to South Sudan so that we can care for our children, so that they can go to school and be the future leaders of South Sudan when there is peace.
There have been around 600,000 returnees since the peace deal was signed in September last year. The UN mission in the country has been facilitating the voluntary repatriations.
Some of those have come back from neighbouring countries. Some of those have gone back to their homes from within South Sudan as well. It's great to see that happen. They've done that spontaneously, their own volition, and what it means is they're getting back to their homes in time to start planting, looking after themselves, growing their own food, being not dependent on humanitarian agencies. And what we're hoping to be able to do is make sure where they're going to, they get the services.
But not everyone is ready to leave the UN protection sites. Some are skeptical on whether the peace will hold. President Salva Kiir and his rival Riek Machar are yet to form a government of national unity, as required in the deal. The delay is a source of great concern among the returnees and those still in IDP camps. Chomrono, CGTN.
Southern Africa is buckling under months of drought, which has led to chronic food shortages. According to the United Nations, 11 million people are at risk of starvation as cash-strapped farmers can do little without rain. In South Africa, the Northern Cape region is the worst affected, with no end in sight to the hot and dry conditions. There has been rain in other parts of the country, but persistently high temperatures could still impact crop yields and livestock farming. CGTN's Julie Shire reports.
South African farmers have struggled to maintain the food basket as drought periods have become longer and more frequent over the last few years. Nicky Makobela went into full-scale livestock and crop farming 4 years ago in the midst of one of South Africa's most crippling droughts. It wasn't long before he started downscaling to stay solvent.
I had to sell some of my cattle because anyway for feeds it was too expensive and the water was so scarce and they were getting more thinner and thinner, and I've sold them at a cheaper price anyway just to save something anyway for the near future for my family.
Conditions have improved in Gauteng with summer rains arriving later than expected, but running costs for Makobela and others around the country are still mounting without proper yields and other challenges.
It was difficult for me because I'm owing Eskom 94,000 because anyway I must use a lot of water to irrigate the field so that the cattle they can get some food and the sheep and all this other the maintenance of the house. But anyway, I couldn't cope anyway, but I'm trying, and we even try to go to the banks to go and look for a loan.
Elsewhere in South Africa, the situation is a lot more dire. The agricultural sector has shed over 30,000 jobs in the last year. Losses are estimated at $500 million, with farmers culling herds to stay afloat. The Northern Cape has so far been the hardest hit and are in need of more than $28 million in disaster relief aid.
Northern Cape is bad because there is no grazing at all. Even the people when they are coming to buy feed from the side of Gauteng, the ones that are getting their animals are dying anyway because of there is nothing, even water for the animals to drink on the rivers and on the dams. There is nothing. Northern Cape, it's a nightmare.
Northern Cape farmers have thrown all their money into keeping their farms running, but they need a lot more help from government if they're to survive yet another long, hot summer. Julie Shire, CGTN, Mahalisburg, South Africa.
Somalia's government continues to suffer security setbacks as landmines and deadly blasts rock the capital, Mogadishu. This despite efforts to strengthen the country's security sector. CGTN's Abdulaziz Bilo has more.
Government forces unearthed what is possibly Al-Shabaab's biggest stockpile of explosives ever discovered. Police carried out the operation earlier this year on a Mogadishu suburb. The cache consisted of suicide belts, grenades, remote detonators, landmines and other various explosive materials. Security personnel say the discovery in Al Shabia in April has seen a drastic reduction in some of Al-Shabaab's deadly car blasts in Mogadishu and other roadside bombs along major supply routes, mostly used by government forces and allied troops assisting in the fight against extremism.
Generally, the number of blasts in Mogadishu has gone down drastically, but privately owned vehicles belonging to civil servants remain easy targets for Al-Shabaab. Such incidents pose a direct threat to the community because they eventually detonate in populated areas.
In September, a roadside bomb killed scores of African Union troops near Balad, an agricultural town in the Middle Shabelle region. Top Somali army generals leading the fight against Al-Shabaab were among recent victims of sophisticated IEDs mounted along the same road. Somalia's international partners have been meeting to strategize ways to curb threats from landmines and other explosives that have curtailed security progress.
And I'm happy to know that we have reduced on the carnage resulting from IEDs in terms of numbers of deaths. And this is simply because of the training we're giving to you.
But in a major blow to international efforts to contain the armed insurgency, a UN report earlier this year noted that militants are using homemade explosives to step up attacks. Analysts say that successful raids on AMISOM bases in the past years aided the group to receive military-grade explosives capable of causing massive loss of lives. Mogadishu, however, argues that it's unable to protect its military from roadside bombs and other deadly landmine blasts due to a decades-long arms embargo imposed by the United Nations Security Council. Several countries have donated armored military vehicles to units of the country's national army following the recent killings of some of its top commanders. The vehicles are expected to boost mobility and speed up security operations in rural areas and regions surrounding Mogadishu. Abdul Aziz Bilo, CGTN, Mogadishu, Somalia.
China has expressed outrage after US President Donald Trump signed a pair of controversial bills into law. The Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act was signed by Trump late Wednesday. China's foreign ministry condemned the action, calling it a gross interference in China's internal affairs. CGTN's Tang Bo has more.
In a statement released by the White House, US President Donald Trump says he signed the Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act. But China strongly condemned the bill and the president's actions as meddling and interference in its internal affairs.
The Chinese government and people are firmly opposed to signing the so-called bill into law. China strongly urges the United States not to implement the law, so as not to affect China-US relations and cooperation between the two countries in important areas. No one should underestimate China's firm determination to safeguard national sovereignty and security, and implement the one country, two systems policy to safeguard Hong Kong's prosperity and stability. China will definitely take effective measures to resolutely oppose this.
Public reaction to the signing of the two bills is divided.
This is totally wrong. It's interfering in our China's political issues and our sovereignty.
It will affect our foreign business environment, especially the economic issues, and the stock market will also be affected, and many of our laws cannot get passed.
I support the signing of the bills which might help stop police violence. It's an opportunity to put pressure on the Hong Kong government.
That chance refers to one of the bills that prohibits Hong Kong police from receiving exports of certain non-lethal munitions, including tear gas, pepper spray, and rubber bullets. People are concerned that that will encourage rioters to conduct more violence.
If the U.S. government taking these actions to stop the import of these arms or tools into Hong Kong, that would discourage the Hong Kong police to take actions on the violence and to seize this kind of vandalism or violence on the Hong Kong street.
The other bill requires sanctions on human rights violations and an annual review of the favorable trade status that Washington grants the region. Hong Kong is not subject to the same U.S. tariffs that the Chinese mainland is. Trade between Hong Kong and the U.S. reached over $67 billion last year, with the U.S. running a $33.8 billion surplus. Its biggest with any country or territory, according to the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative.
Analysts say any move to end Hong Kong's special treatment could prove self-defeating for the U.S., which has benefited from the business-friendly conditions in the region. If Hong Kong loses its favorable trading status, U.S. companies that rely on the territory's role as a middleman or for transshipping would likely take their business elsewhere. Tang Bo, CGTN, Hong Kong.
Well, Hong Kong police have released a statement on their clearing operation at the Polytechnic University. The campus was at the center of a tense standoff between protesters and police last week.
I would like to conclude that we've almost completed the work today. So
the operation is going to finish today. However, there are some work still required from us and also the colleagues from the fire services that we have to do it under the sunlight. So inevitably that we have to resume tomorrow morning. However, I'm confident that we can finish it by tomorrow and return a safe campus to the university management.
Police say they found nearly 4,000 petrol bombs and over 500 chemical materials, such as acid and base materials that could be used for making explosives. Police say they also found weapons such as bows, arrows and air rifles. Over 40 cars were left damaged in the university's parking lot. Police say they believe gasoline was extracted from these vehicles to make petrol bombs. Meanwhile, protesters have gathered at Edinburgh Place in Hong Kong, some waving American flags after US President Donald Trump signed into law the so-called Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act. Well, let's now go to Raman Young for your latest business news.
Thank you very much, Lindy. Here's what's coming up in business. Equities in Ghana fall into record lows as investor confidence wanes. And in a fortnight, Jumia has closed down operations in yet another African country, this time in Tanzania. Welcome back. Let's start in the world of trading. Ghana's stock market has seen a fall in trading volumes. It's also being attributed to uncertainties mainly revolving around an extended cleanup of the country's financial sector, from banks to management funds. Now, this, of course, has resulted in the poorest performance recorded by the bourse since July 2017. Data released in November pointed to the performance of the market. It's actually down by over 24%. That's JSE, that is, as of October compared to the same period a year before. Major reforms in the financial sector by the central bank have led to the collapse of an estimated 9 banks, 347 microfinance companies, and the closure of some 53 fund management companies. Elsewhere, the online retailer Jumia Technologies, often referred to as the Amazon of Africa, quote unquote, has closed its e-commerce business in Tanzania. Users in the country will no longer be able to buy and sell goods from its website, jumia.tz. The move comes just 10 days after the retailer shut down operations in Cameroon. Now, Jumia says closing shop in Tanzania is part of an ongoing portfolio optimization. The online retailer is now available in just 12 countries, down from 14 when the company originally listed depository notes in the United States and at New York Stock Exchange in April. Jumia's exit from the two countries comes just a few weeks after it disclosed its third quarter numbers. However, the company says its classifieds listing business, Jumia Deals, will continue to function in Tanzania. Something similar happened, of course, in Cameroon. The China-Africa Industrial Capacity Corporation Expo is underway in the Kenyan capital. CGTN's Daniel Plafka explains how Kenya's renewed focus on its manufacturing sector is changing the face of the country's relationship with China.
It's no secret that Kenya is industrializing. For decades, Chinese machinery and expertise have been at the heart of this economic transformation.
According to the recent report, there are more than 400 Chinese companies operating in Kenya.
But the businesses gathered here are recognizing that domestic enterprises are starting to shoulder their share of the industrial burden.
More than 60 Chinese firms from 11 separate provinces and municipalities, all gathering together here in Nairobi for the China-Africa Industrial Capacity Cooperation Expo. The idea is to bring together Chinese capital and Kenyan talent to spell a brighter future for East Africa's regional economy.
The focus is on building local capacity. Investors are betting that a more self-reliant Kenya will translate into greater prosperity for both countries.
to actually meet local people who are in partnership with the Chinese firms, that's a very positive thing for us, because it means that there's a lot of skill exchange that is going on. There's a lot of understanding between the Chinese and the Kenyan people.
Africa Traffic Facilities Limited provides furnishings for Kenya's road network.
The markings on the roads, and the directional signs, the road signs, and our latest project, and still ongoing, it's in a remote part of Garissa County, and which connected all these small villages and towns that was inaccessible before, which I'm very proud of.
The company's materials are largely manufactured in China, but that's starting to change. Manufacturing already accounts for roughly a sixth of Kenya's GDP, and cottage industries, like the massive semi-formal metalworking sector, are enjoying increased recognition. Recently, the government entered a $30 million deal with the informal sector to manufacture doors and windows for its affordable housing program.
We are going to, in the very near future, and set up our own factory in Kenya, and having the raw materials sourced in Kenya, if possible, or Africa, and which creates local jobs and add value to our products.
It's just one example of how Chinese enterprises in the country are pivoting to keep pace with Kenya's rapid industrialization.
Our move for industrialization and manufacturing is a position that has been taken by government. In some time, we should be able to do some of these things ourselves. And that's where you get the transfer of education and the transfer of skills. That's a different type of partnership.
And one that's already starting to bear fruit. The three-day event also features a job fair aimed at pairing Chinese firms with Kenyan talent.
From energy to agriculture, from construction to transportation, Chinese exhibitors here are eager to cater to a local market that's increasingly thirsty for innovative solutions to age-old problems. Both sides are hoping that beefed-up industrial capacity in East Africa will give business players all the tools they need to succeed. Daniel Plafker in Nairobi, Kenya, for CGTN.
And finally, in the United States economy, the country's farm bankruptcies in the year to September rose 24%. That's the highest level since 2011. That data is from the American Farm Bureau Federation. Now, the rise in bankruptcies is being attributed mostly to the China-US trade war, which have taken quite the toll on growers in both rural and urban areas. CGTN's Tony Walterman has this report.
Oh, wow.
So welcome to our sauna.
This is one of 5 greenhouses at the Eco City Farms in Prince George's County, Maryland, about a 20-minute drive outside Washington, D.C.
Here as well, actually those are mustard greens, these are kale.
Margaret Morgan Hubbard started an urban farming training program here 10 years ago after leaving a plum job at the University of Maryland.
The whole enterprise is an attempt to learn much more about how to produce food and help people know where their food comes from.
All the vegetables are hand-planted and hand-harvested. Even the soil has been meticulously cultivated to optimal organic richness. To help pay the bills, the crop is sold in a farm share program. But Hubbard says money is always tight, a stress exacerbated by the unique challenges of farming.
Farming is a thankless profession. The weather changes constantly, conditions change constantly. That takes a physical toll on one's body, and there is not much money in it.
The challenges of urban farming aren't unique. Large industrial farmers of the Midwest are also experiencing mounting farm stress. Bankruptcies are on the rise. They're up 24%, and a trade war with China is a major reason why. China has more than halved its agricultural purchases from the U.S. since the trade battle began. Soy farmers, who previously exported 60% of their harvest to China, have been among the hardest hit. Distress is spreading. Advocacy group Farm Aid says calls to its crisis hotline have more than doubled. And government figures show farm debt is expected to hit a record high of $416 billion this year. To ease the pain, the Trump administration has doled out more than $15 billion in relief payments. The money offers a safety net, but also obscures the reality on the ground.
There is a lot of stress, and I certainly think that without this assistance, it would be a much tougher environment But at the same time, in talking to many of our farmers, they're really anxious to see a quick resolution to trade so that we can get back to business as usual.
Returning to the status quo could prove a challenge in itself. As the trade war drags on, supply chains are being rerouted, and U.S. farmers are losing the market share they spent decades building.
We're inviting competition around the world. There are going to be investments in Europe to supply pork to China, investments in South America, expanding acreage to make soybeans.
The impact is less acute at EcoCity Farms. It doesn't export to China, but it does buy from it.
Almost everything that we buy and wear these days comes from China,
leaving even non-farmers reaping what is sown. Tony Waterman, CGTN, Prince George's County, Maryland.
And I'll leave it there for the time being. I'll be back at the top of the hour, though. We'll be focusing on Zimbabwe. The president over there has made an interesting U-turn on a plan to remove grain subsidies next year. But what else is on the menu as far as policy action is concerned? We'll have some answers for you live from Harare at 1800 GMT. See you then. For now, though, back to Lily.
Thanks, Rama. Well, let's take a short break. Here's what's still ahead on Africa Live. Coming up, we tell you all about a Tunisian breeder and his celebrated horse dubbed the father of champions.
Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.
We start in North Africa now, where a 16-year-old horse in Tunisia has gained international fame. Many of the current world champions are descended from this beautiful Arabian horse of Tunisian origin.
Rida Ghobr has been breeding horses for over 4 decades. He witnessed Orabi's birth. Grooming the award-winner horse is still one of Rida's favorite morning routines.
His father too was a champion of Tunisia in endurance horse racing. Arabi's first competition was at the age of 2 in Manouab city. He was still a boy when he earned the 800-meter Okba award, for which he still holds the race record.
At the age of 3, Orabi won the Grand Prix of the President of the Republic in the 1700-meter race. The prize is considered a first-class competition, as it is the highest rank of all horse competitions.
The Grand Prix of the President of the Republic is considered the best in terms of rank granted in national competitions. Urabi is an exceptional horse.
The proud breeder showed several awards won by Urabi, namely the World Arabian Horse Organization Trophy in 2005, as well as other international prizes. Orabi competed in France against Arabian horses.
Orabi beat them all in France, and that was the proudest moment of my life. This horse is like my son, and there is a natural tie between us. I love all Arabian horses, but this one is special.
The aging brown horse with a white blaze is still strong and fast. Orabi's success story is not limited to trophies and prizes. He was also temporarily sold in Europe for 3 years for breeding purposes. Orabi will be competing alongside 2 of his sons in many festivals and competitions to be held in 2020 in El Meknesi, Sidi Bouzid. The 16-year-old horse is the father of many Tunisian and international Arabian horse champions. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
And to South Africa now, where a young artist is using the medium of string art to make portraits of world-famous leaders and celebrities. CGTN's Sumitra Naidu had a chance to meet up with the talented artist.
Andiswa Mkunzwa grew up in East London. He always had a love for drawing.
I had a background of drawing with my computer, but I wanted something different. And then I Googled, and then I found this thing that is called the string art. So I started researching about it, and then I started doing it. and it was so fascinating for me.
Learning a new art form wasn't easy, but Mkunzwa persevered and began enjoying it.
I decided that, okay, let me recognize the most influential people by just maybe selecting anyone, like I did to Sia. After I'm done with the artwork, and then I go and present to that particular person. I use nails, I use also the yen. Normally what I do, I draw a person on a computer and I print the paper and I lay it on this board, and then I start putting my nails one by one. I'm currently doing Prince Harry and the wife and the baby there. So I look at the picture, I have to have the image while I'm doing this, so that, because sometimes I remove the paper and I don't really see where are the lines. It takes me about 3 weeks, a small one, if I work maybe 4 or 5 hours a day, because I cannot just do it the whole day, so I have to rest a bit.
Kunza's work is becoming very popular. His attention to detail is impeccable, and he's managing to get a few famous faces down to a T.
This is too beautiful, eh?
This one, I did it because I was under pressure. So I did it in a week, but I was sleeping maybe around 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock every day. So it took me a long time. I didn't even know how much, but I know the week and all the nights I wouldn't sleep.
Sumitra Naidu, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
You're watching Africa Live. Your sports news coming up next.
How would you create your legend? On the fields, on the tracks, in the arenas of Africa. Were you born to be a player? Could this moment be yours? Sports Scene. Find